You think aging is curable.
It's not a matter of thinking, it's obviously curable.
You, as a sort of an artificial intelligence researcher, decided to declare a war on aging. Could you just define aging for people?
So I say that aging is the combination of two processes. There's a process that goes on throughout life, and then there's a process that happens later in life. Cars are not built to last 100 years, but there are still some cars around that were built 100 years ago. I was thinking, well, okay, the body's a machine. It's a really, really complicated machine, but it's still a machine. That has got to be the single most fucked up reason to take my biology serious. A very small minority of scientists are explicit that their goal in life is to win a Nobel Prize. How come you can get any life extension just by fixing one type of damage in a mouse? The answer is because the body is so clever.
Aubrey, amazing. Thank you very much for being here and for having some time to talk to us. Today, I just want to find out more about you, basically, and about the amazing work that you've been doing sort of through your life. We're sort of assuming the average person that's listening to this isn't a longevity or a health or a bio expert and has probably never heard of you. Actually, when we first met, a year or so ago, it was the first time I'd heard of you. But then at the same time, we're meeting tens of people that, frankly, you were often their hero and the reason that they had actually got into what they were doing at that particular moment. So it was, surprising for me to learn all this stuff at once, and sort of I've been lucky to learn and understand sort of why. And I would love to hear more about that. So if we maybe just sort of start at the basics, or would you like to just who are you and introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll maybe take it back and go into detail on some other bits.
Yeah, well, like you, I'm from the UK originally. I did not start out as a biologist, actually. I decided when I was very young, like 8 or 9, that I wanted to do big things. I wanted to make a difference to the world. But the way in which I decided to do that was to get into artificial intelligence research. Because when I was 15 or so, I started programming, found out pretty good at it, and thought, well, okay, this is something that programmers are needed for, and it's an important problem that people have spent so much of their time doing stuff that they wouldn't do unless they were being paid for it, so we need better automation and so on. However, even from that early age, I was perfectly well aware that actually the problem of work was by no means the biggest problem for humanity. That by far the biggest problem for humanity was the problem of aging, because it causes by far the most suffering, it makes you sick, it kills people. However, I never saw myself as a particularly talented biologist. I did biology in school, same as everything else. But I thought, well, obviously the biologists are getting on with that, so I never thought about it. And of course, my mistake was not to consider the possibility that other people didn't see aging that way. I just never did the experiment of, talking about it to anybody. And then when I was 26, where I was working in artificial intelligence research, and I was doing perfectly well, I was quite happy with how my research was going. I met, and shortly afterwards married, a biologist. And she was quite a lot older than me. She was actually a full professor in San Diego at the time, and she was in the UK on sabbatical. And through her, not only did I accidentally learn a lot of biology over the dinner table, but also, gradually, I became aware that we were never talking about aging. And I started asking questions. I would say, you don't seem to be interested in aging. And she would say, well, no, I'm not. And I would say, well, why not? And she would say, well, it's just decay, isn't it? What fundamental truths about the universe are you going to learn by studying decay? And I would say, well, sure, yeah, but it's bad for you. And she would say, well, that's not my problem. And I would say, well, it kind of is. There were problems. And so eventually, after a couple more years, so we're talking about 94, 95, I came to terms with this to the extent of deciding that I had to switch fields. I, had convinced myself by this point through my AI work that I was pretty good at working on very hard problems. I also knew that when someone switches fields, they often do very well in their new field because they're not encumbered by the conventional wisdom of the short. So I thought, I've got a chance of making a difference, of making a contribution. So I thought I'll have a go. And here I am. I was in a rather fortunate position to be able to switch fields without much risk. Basically, I had a very undemanding job at the time that was paying the bills, but giving me a lot of spare time, and it was at the University of Cambridge, so I had access to all the university facilities and so on and so forth. And I was able to, pay my way to conferences because, of course, by then I wasn't being invited to give talks or anything.
Sure.
And so, yeah, here I am. And it worked out. I mean, after the first 5 years or so of, learning stuff and just absorbing what was known in the field, and of course, getting known by the top people in the field because I was publishing stuff already.
Sure.
It was, it was esoteric, theoretical stuff, but it was well received. Um, then I had this crazy idea in 2000, a real, a kind of eureka moment of what everybody was missing in terms of how we might actually develop medicines that really work against aging.
Sure.
And and it was a big, big paradigm shift. We can talk about the details of that in a minute if you like. But the issue really was that it was such a paradigm shift that at first none of my colleagues in the field really had the faintest idea what I was saying. They could put aside a word of it. Well, actually, the one person, Julie Campisi, who very tragically died rather young last year, but hardly anybody else did. It took me several years to fix that. But eventually, yeah, it worked. People got the message, and it's become very much the mainstream way of thinking now.
Okay, super interesting. So much to dig in on that. So let's start maybe right at the top. Right, you as a sort of an artificial intelligence researcher decided to declare a war on aging, and so I maybe just like to could you just like define aging for people, right? Just to start with, what is aging?
Well, thank you for asking that, because of course, one of the big problems that we have is, and a very paradoxical, weird problem, is that even though aging had been the number one preoccupation of humanity since the beginning of civilization, if not earlier, nevertheless, people have different definitions of it. It's crazy. So I have a preferred definition that I don't know not only is correct, but it also kind of demystified aging. It helps to explain that it's not really this kind of enigma that we don't understand at all. So I'd say that aging is the combination of two processes. There's a process that goes on throughout life, and then there's a process that happens late in life. The one that goes on throughout life is the accumulation of changes to the microscopic structure and composition of the body, the molecular and cellular composition. These changes are caused by our normal metabolism. They are inevitable, inescapable changes that occur simply as consequences of the network of processes the body has to perform to keep us alive from one day to the next. And the word that I use to encompass all those changes is the word damage. The reason I use that word is because the body is set up to tolerate a certain amount of those changes without any significant decline in function, whether mental function or physical functions, but only a certain amount. Eventually, there's more damage than what the body's set up to tolerate. And that's when the second process kicks off, late in life. When the damage becomes more than what the body's set up to tolerate, we start to go downhill in terms of function, mental and physical, as I say. And eventually that kills us. So that's all aging is. It's really, if you think about it, just the same as aging of a simple man-made machine, like a car or an airplane.
Yep.
A car accumulates rust, for example, as a consequence of the inherent operation of a car.
Sure.
And eventually, there's too much rust and the doors fall off, right? So it's just the same thing, really. That sounds like an analogy that's so simplistically too good to be true, but it's actually a really perfectly good analogy.
Fine. And then to keep it simple again, you think that we can solve aging. And I guess like let's find out how do you think we can what do you think is possible, I guess?
Right. So this is where that analogy comes into its own, because of course with cars we know this. We know the answer to your question. Cars are not built to last 100 years, but there are still some cars around that were built 100 years ago. How come? The answer, how those cars have transcended their warranty period, is simply that they have benefited from unusually comprehensive, periodic, preventative maintenance.
Okay.
Every so often, you scratch the rust off, and you make sure the doors never fall off.
Yep.
And it works. It really, really works. These cars, the vintage cars, are working every bit as well as they did the day they were built. So this shows that preventative maintenance is a complete solution to the problem of accumulation of damage that eventually causes decline in function. Now, of course, for a living organism that's far more complicated than any man-made machine, the actual implementation of this preventative maintenance is much more challenging, and that's why we can't do it yet. But that's only a difference of degree. It's not a difference of a qualitative.
Sure, sure. And I guess like you as an artificial intelligence researcher were sat there looking, at the sort of like aging or the sort of like biology industry, and for some reason you thought this was a solvable problem, whereas everyone else basically seems to accept that aging is an inevitable process and that we should just age. Is that fair?
That's pretty fair, yeah. I mean, it wasn't so much that I was working in artificial intelligence per se. It was simply that I was working in some kind of engineering discipline. So I was thinking like an engineer. So I was thinking, well, okay, the body's a machine. It's a really, really complicated machine, but it's still a machine, and therefore its function is determined by its structure. And therefore, if we can maintain the structure and or restore the structure to how it was at an earlier age, then we're going to maintain the function as well. It's not even arguable. It's just bleeding obvious. But it was that kind of not what my colleagues in the field were paying attention to.
What's more important than than this, right? I guess if you look at aging, from what I've understood when I'm listening to you as well, right? It's like a lot of biologists or people in medicine spend their time trying to prevent cancer or trying to detect cancer earlier, or then if you've got cancer, trying to defeat cancer faster with less consequences, right? And you would, there's maybe a reason we get cancer in the first place. There's maybe something you would say.
Well, so it's worse than that. So first of all, let's go back to my first wife, who got me into the field by accident. Now, she was a basic scientist. She was interested in finding things out for the sake of finding things out, not for the sake of benefiting humanity. And as far as she was concerned, if the stuff that she would discover would benefit humanity in the fullness of time, then fine, but it wasn't what she was doing.
Sure.
And it wasn't until I started talking in depth to her about this kind of thing that I really understood how profound is the difference of mindset between basic scientists and technologists of all kinds. Technologists actually understand that if you want to manipulate nature in one way or another, then there's a certain amount that you need to know, but only a certain amount. You can get to the point of knowing enough. Whereas for a basic scientist, the concept of knowing enough just doesn't compute.
Yep.
Because for them, the best questions are the ones whose answers create more questions, right?
No, are you?
Now, of course, medics are technologists. They are trying to manipulate nature. But then they are up against the fact that we're not very good at medicine yet, and they're constantly having to live with the fact of how little they can do. They don't really think about future medicine. They just do their best with the tools that exist already.
Sure.
Which leaves us with this other group of people, the researchers, who are doing so I often describe myself as a biomedical gerontologist, which means that I'm interested in not just understanding aging, but doing something about it. But I'm interested in doing something about it with tools that don't yet exist. Like we're developing those tools. And as such, all I'm really doing when I'm focused on aging is saying, prevention is better than cure, and therefore, if we can attack these structural changes, the first of the two processes I described, then we won't have to attack the second one.
Sure.
Because the second one, won't happen.
Okay.
However, in the times, 25 years ago, when I started thinking about these things and getting involved in generally becoming the field's heretic, I found that all of my colleagues who were working on aging, because there were some of them, right, they were just not doing it like engineers at all.
Yep.
They were just looking at nature and saying, well, okay, some species age faster than others, therefore maybe we should just try and understand why and try and slow aging down. It's honestly, looking back, it's a surprise that it took as long as it did, 5 years, for it to dawn on me.
Yeah.
What they were missing was that reversing aging would actually be a lot easier than slowing aging down. Because slowing aging down means somehow making the body run more cleanly, if we go back to the car analogy.
Sure.
Whereas reversing aging simply means through preventative maintenance.
Sure. There's so much to dig into here. I think first I want to dig into this point where you already mentioned here about that you were an engineer, okay, and you had this different kind of approach to sort of like to problems generally, right? You're a pretty good engineer. Like I've seen you doing a lot of maths on your laptop, and I look over your laptop and I can't understand a single word on your screen, right?
That got very little to do with engineering.
Okay, fair. But what I want to bring out is, I mean, you have solved at least one problem that no one has ever solved before in maths, right?
I did make an interesting contribution a few years ago, yeah.
Do you want to just say that kind of like literally, right? So there's a problem that had never been solved before in maths,
Yeah.
and you solved it, I guess, as the simple one of that. What was the problem? What did you do briefly?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, in 1950, a young guy named Edward Nelson thought to himself, well, okay, supposing that you drew lines between every pair of points in the plane. So what does that mean, first of all? The plane, that's this, like, two-dimensional, flat, infinite surface, right? And the points on the plane are every single point. So a pair of numbers, not just integers, a pair of real numbers, like pi and e or whatever, something like that. So every point has a coordinates, and both the coordinates are real numbers. And what you do is you draw a line between every pair of points that are exactly 1 inch apart, or 1 unit apart. So, for example, the origin 0, 0 is going to every point in the circle around it. Think about that. Now, so this is what's called an infinite graph. And then we have a concept which exists for infinite graphs and also for finite graphs. It's called the chromatic number. What that means is basically you color each point in your graph, and you have a finite number of colors that you have available to you. It could be 3, whatever. And the only thing you're not allowed to do is to color 2 points the same color if there's a line between them. Okay, right? So, the chromatic number of a graph is simply the number of colors that you need in order to satisfy that rule. Okay. So now let's come back to our infinite graph consisting of all the points, right? Now, what is the chromatic number of that graph? This guy Ed Nelson, saw that it was easy to show that you needed at least 4 colors.
Yep.
I can probably explain that actually even without pencil and paper. So you can't do it with 2 colors, right? Because if you take 3 points in an equilateral triangle, then they need 3 different colors, right?
Sure.
Turns out that you only need a little bit more complexity. You need 7 points in order to create something that you can't do with 3 colors. You need 4 colors for. The simplest example is something called a Moses spindle. Essentially, if you take a triangle like I just said, right, and let's say it's blue, green, red.
Yep.
Okay. You could put another point up here and make a diamond, right? That would also have to be red because these are blue and green. So you it with 3 points. Right? Now, do the same thing again, but the second diamond is going to share 1 point with the one sharp end of the diamond with the first diamond. So in other words, you've basically got 2 hands of a clock. Okay, if you clock this. Now, if the first diamond has got to have a red point here and a red point at the top because it's blue green in the middle, then the second diamond's also got to have a red point over here, right? Because it's right. That's the only way it could be. But then, of course, like any hand of a real clock, you can have them at any different angle.
Yep.
So you can arrange them so that the 2 red points at the tips of the hands are relative.
Yep, sure.
And therefore they can't be the same color, but they've got to be the same color, so you need more than 3 colors. Okay. So that's the that was how it was really to show that you need at least 4 colors.
Yep.
But then, could we say you could definitely do it with 4 colors? Nobody can figure out how to do that. And they did figure out quickly that you could definitely do it with 7 colors.
Okay.
That turns out basically you do a cheat sheet.
Okay.
You do a honeycomb.
Yep.
You cover the entire plane of the honeycomb with hexagons that are slightly less than 1 inch across.
Yep.
All right. And it turns out that it's easy to color a honeycomb like that.
Yep.
With 7 colors. It's such that each hexagon, if any 2 hexagons of the same color, are more than 1 inch apart.
Yep.
So this shows you basically you can just use this cheat sheet as a way of coloring all the points.
Okay.
However, for 68 years,
Yep.
people had tried and failed to figure out whether the chromatic number was 4 or 5 or 6 or 7.
Okay.
What I was able to do was show that it was not 4, that you definitely needed 5 points at least.
Okay.
5 colors at least. Essentially, I found a collection. So I told you that you need 7 points to show in order to demonstrate that you need to have at least 4 colors.
Sure.
In order to demonstrate that you need at least 5 colors, I need more than 1,500 points. And of course, I found that partly by computational means, but partly by thinking. So this was quite a famous problem. It's something that everybody had worked on.
Yeah.
but they'd given up after half an hour because they thought, well, everyone's tried it,
Sure.
And I just looked under the right lamppost, basically. I just looked at this thing really for not for very long at all and thought of a way to go about seeking an example, and it just worked.
But it is an interesting analogy, right? Because like you say there, it's something that every single mathematician had looked at some point in their lives. Maybe they hadn't spent very much attention to it because they'd just been like, okay, maybe there are other things that I should spend my time on. Maybe like solving cancer. And then there is maybe this other approach, to a problem. And again, you've looked at aging, or you've looked at this sort of like you've sat there as someone that cares about humanity and wants to make a difference. And as an engineer, you've been like, hey, there's like a different approach where you can sort of take it right. Now, you said earlier as well that this made you a heretic. So why was this so controversial? What was the problem?
Yeah, I mean, the math side of things was just an example of, thinking creatively.
Sure.
And, I've spent my whole adult life toying with math problems just recreationally, but never with any expectation that I would ever make any progress on them. I don't have proper training in this, right? I was really just like, just enjoyed trying to understand a little, at least in a rudimentary way, why those problems were difficult.
Sure.
So yeah, that means it's extraordinarily rare that a recreational mathematician makes a big breakthrough like
Sure.
this. And it's certainly completely unprecedented that a recreational mathematician who is actually also a public figure in a completely different field will do so. So there was that move. And here's a funny thing that happened, right? So shortly after I published this, some guy posted a mention of it on Reddit, but they posted it in a longevity subreddit.
Okay.
So you can imagine what happened. About 8 milliseconds later, some guy comes along and said, "Go away, this is off topic."
Okay.
But then the original poster came back and said, "Well, I know it's off topic, dear, but the point is, a lot of people think Aubrey the Great a bit of a heretic and a bit of a lunatic, right? Therefore, I thought I'd mention this just to show that he has got a couple of neurons to rub together."
Yeah. That's why I thought we should mention it as well, right?
So that was the point at which my attention was drawn to this thread on Reddit.
Sure.
So I came along and read this, and I thought, that has got to be the single most fucked up reason to take my biology seriously. But half an hour later, someone posted on the thread, they say, yes, I'm an example of this. I always thought he was a bit of a flake, but now I'm going to take him seriously. And this happened a few more times after that. So since then, I felt considerably less guilty spending some of my time doing.
Okay, interesting. It's maybe I just have to solve some sort of maths problem, and everyone will start taking me seriously as well, right? This is the trick. But okay, right. So to bring this back to the work that you're doing, sort of like now, right? I mean, maybe to continue in that story, you decided to dedicate your life to this, right? And you were a heretic maybe initially, and just continue that story. Like, how did you decide to address the problem?
Well, I mean, I'd already decided, but by the mid-90s, I'd already come to terms with the fact that I just had to have a go.
Sure.
And of course, the thing about science or technology for that matter, but if you're doing pioneering stuff, is that you don't necessarily expect to succeed. You just, you go into an area where you think you've got a chance of making a contribution.
Sure.
But, exactly who makes the contribution is not really the point.
Yeah.
So a very small minority of scientists are explicit that their goal in life is to win a Nobel Prize. And nearly all other scientists just really look down on scientists like that. This is totally missing the point.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I thought I'd work on it. But yeah, then I had this eureka moment that changed everything. And then it got pretty interesting because I realized very quickly that by doing preventative maintenance, it would be just like vintage cars. We could keep the body going indefinitely, which of course was completely antithetical to the way that anybody else was thinking in the field, because they were thinking about comparing species, right? Furthermore, it was considered to be absolutely explosive politically. The idea of talking about, radical life extension, everyone felt that it sounded unscientific. So it got me in a huge amount of trouble. A lot of people kept their distance from me. But a lot of journalists did the opposite. So I became quite a high-profile public speaker pretty quickly. I think I spoke at TED in 2006. I was on all the media, 60 Minutes and Barbara Walters and the Air Report. So,
Yep.
and uh, so yes, I mean, this annoyed my more conservative colleagues even more. And a lot of people were very ambivalent. They saw that I was bringing people into the field, which is obviously a good thing, but they also felt that I was making it more difficult for them to get their grant applications funded. Somehow bringing the into disrepute by talking about radical longevity, even though I could perfectly well explain the logic of how I was getting to that reason.
No, I understand that.
Conclusion.
Understand. I mean, maybe to come again there. So, like, what are you doing right now?
So, right now at LEV Foundation, what we're doing is the second stage of the preventative maintenance approach. If you think about preventative maintenance, even for a simple machine like a car, there's lots of bits to it. It's a divide and conquer thing, because a car does various types of damage to itself, and they need different technologies to repair, right? Human body, absolutely the same, though on a much bigger scale. So what has to happen is you have to develop the components, the individual repair approaches, medicine in our case, of course, and then you have to put them together. Now, the putting together part in most areas of engineering is actually the easy part. If your components do what they're supposed to do, then you can be pretty sure that the combined thing is going to have the overall function. But in biology, we're working with a machine whose inner workings we have a very, very poor understanding of, which means that you can get plenty of surprises at that second stage when you put things together.
Sure.
So, what I've done over the past 20 years is I've spent my time working on the individual components. And of course, some components are harder than others to develop. Some top to damage are harder to repair than others. So I've been working on the most difficult ones. And that's because other people have been working on the lower hanging fruits, because they feel they can, get somewhere with that. And I positioned myself from an early stage as being funded pretty much entirely by philanthropy, which means that I don't have to worry about, peer review and things like that. I don't have to convince people, in government or whatever, that I'm going to succeed in this or that. So I was uniquely in a position to work on these most difficult things. But the people who've been working on the easier things had been making progress, of course. And some of those things, I thought maybe 3 or 4 years ago, had got to the point where they were actually showing success. Only a little bit of success, but better than nothing. And only in mice, but that's better than nothing. So the question then comes up, can we combine these things and get some additive effect? Can we actually get more life extension this way? Now, first of all, you may ask, how come you can get any life extension just by fixing one type of damage in a mouse?
Sure.
Yeah, sounds paradoxical. The answer is because the body is so clever. The body actually, everything talks to everything else. There's an enormous amount of crosstalk between the various systems that go on in the body, including the systems that limit the rate at which damage accumulates naturally. We have, the body is on our side, really, when we think about this. What we are trying to do is augment what the body already knows how to do, because there are gaps in what the body already knows how to do. So anyway, so the idea is we might get an additive effect. And so I felt that at the time we started LEV Foundation 2.5 years ago, that was the time when we could really have a go. So we put 4 things together. We did a huge experiment with 1,000 mice, cost $3.5 million. And we put 4 things together that were all reasonably effective in their own right individually. And we asked, are they working better in combination? And the results were pretty encouraging. I mean, we didn't knock it out of the park. I wasn't expected to do so the first time. But especially in the female mice, the male mice, now there's lots of complications that we're still trying to understand, but female mice, we definitely saw an additive effect. The mice that were getting all 4 of the interventions did the best, the ones that were getting none of them did the worst, and the were somewhere in the middle. So this was very much what we were hoping for. And so what we'd like to do next is a succession of bigger experiments with 1,000 mice that involve maybe 8 interventions rather than just 4. Attacking a variety of different things. And of course, all the time we're learning not only from our own result, but also from other results that are coming out of the literature from the community. We work constantly with everywhere in the community.
Yeah. Again, so many things to touch into that, right? And so, like, at a high level, again, just like so, the LEV Foundation, right, is a nonprofit foundation that you run right now, which is basically pursuing this mission of defeating aging in whatever the best way you think that is. And one of the things that you've been doing is running a large experiment that basically no one else does because maybe there's absolutely no incentive kind of like there to prove that it is possible, to defeat aging. Um, Again, you mentioned that that you again, but partly because you don't have that, it's not purely to get peer reviewed or to have commercial interest, right? That it's philanthropy that you've been relying on to date for this, right? So you go around begging everyone for money, right? Is that the core, right?
Pretty much it, yes.
Right, but I think, like, before you begged anyone for money, you put your own money where your mouth is. Is that correct?
Yes, my mother was very smart when she was young. Her father died in 1950 and left her a respectable amount of money by those standards, about £30,000.
Okay.
And she put all of it into property.
Okay.
She bought 2 properties in Chelsea, in the centre of London. The result was that we actually had a very strange. I had a very strange childhood in that way. I was living in an affluent neighbourhood, but we had no money at all. But, so I only went to Harrow because I got a good scholarship, and I was able to go there for free, things like that. Um, so it was strange life. But the point is, the houses appreciated.
Yep.
A lot. So when my mother died in 2011, she left me, in US dollar terms, $16.5 million. And yeah, I had decided sometime before then that what I wanted to do with this money, overwhelmingly anyway, was to accelerate the research that I
Yep.
was doing with my foundation. This was before LEV Foundation. Of course, this was when I had this other organization called Sense Research Foundation. Um, and so I left more than three-quarters of the money to the foundation. We
Yep.
were able to do it in a tax-efficient way by creating, in advance of my mother's dying,
Yep.
a UK charity that acted as an intermediate, because she was British, of course.
Yep.
But yeah, so that worked. So I was able to donate something like $13 million to the foundation.
Yep.
And the stuff that I cut was enough for me to buy a nice house.
Yep.
But apart from that, I've always had very inexpensive tastes. So
Sure.
it was not a difficult decision for me.
No, great. I love it. I love it. I love it. I respect anyone that, commits themselves to their own mission. And I think if you are going around asking everyone for their money, the fact that you've given your own, I hope that makes it easier for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wish that it made it as easy as I was hoping. I mean, certainly I do feel that leading by example is always a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it hasn't made much difference as I would have hoped.
This is what I wanted, because this is what's crazy, right? Because every time we talk again, and it's like, that's an incredible amount of money to donate, right? But actually, in the grand scheme of things, US healthcare system spends, I don't know, $1 trillion a year or something, right? Like, there's an obscene amount of money which is being thrown at humans' health, and there appears to be very little which is going at this. And it's just sort of like the scale of aging just seems, the more and more I've been thinking about it against this we met, it's unbelievably large. The the amount of aging that's occurring. I mean, it's very obvious to say, but it's like, it's absolutely obscene. And there seems to be very little money in contrast to that, which is actually going to.
That's all right. I mean, when I made this donation, I was able to double the budget of my foundation for a period of 5 years, 2012 through 2016. And but that's because we had so little already. Yeah,
Yep.
we were spending like $2 million a year. It went up to
Yep.
like 4 million.
Yep.
It's like insane how this goes, but it's like this is simply how irrational humanity is about aging.
Yep.
They've somehow found ways to put it out of their minds and get on with their miserably short lives. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I just, again, I feel like we should maybe like restate this point again, or like, because I don't think we've explicitly said it. I mean, like, you think aging is curable,
It's not a matter of thinking. It's obviously curable.
right?
I mean, the human body is a machine. Therefore, its function is determined by its structure. That's not a hypothesis. It's a fact.
Yeah.
And therefore, all we need to do is develop damage repair.
Yeah. And again, that you think this is absolutely possible. Like, how long does it take? And this might be a time to allude to the name of your foundation, particularly that I expect most people haven't, have heard of before. Like, is it really solvable? Is this something that's going to happen in 1,000 years? And like, we're just being really nice to future generations by starting the work on this. Like, yeah, tell us a bit more about how possible this really is.
Yeah. So, of course, the human body becomes such a complicated machine. There's an enormous number of different types of damage that we need to repair, and each of which could kill us on its own.
Yep.
More or less on schedule if we didn't.
Yep.
Right. But the question is, how well do we need to do that? If we go back to cars, we know everything about how to repair a car, and so we don't need to get progressively better at repairing. When cars are 200 years old, they'll be getting exactly the same preventative maintenance that they're getting now.
Yep.
Right? But with the human body, it's going to take a while to get that good at doing this damage repair.
Yep.
Maybe hundreds of years to be able to completely repair absolutely everything the body does to itself that we'd rather it didn't. Which sounds like a bit of a bugger, really, but actually it's all right because of this concept called longevity escape velocity.
Okay.
Supposing we get fairly good at doing this repair, such that we can take people who are already, let's say, 60 years old, average health for a 60-year-old, and we can fix them up so that they don't get to be biologically 60 again until, let's say, they're 80.
Yep.
Right? 20 years. Now, when they're 80, they won't be exactly the same as they were when they were 60 the first time. And the reason they won't is because the types of damage that will be in the 80-year-old's body will be difficult damage.
Yeah.
The easy, if we define the easy damage as the damage that we know how to fix already, sure, and the difficult damage is the stuff that we don't, then when we get to the point of being able to get 20 years, that'll be by fixing some easy damage, most of the damage, but not all.
Yep.
And then we can do that as often as we like during those 20 years, which means that to a good approximation, the 80-year-old who's biologically 60 will have no easy damage. All of their damage will be difficult.
Yep.
Which is a bit of a shame because it means that we can apply these easy interventions over and over again and nothing's going to help. The person's just going to get sick and old and die and all that. However, the good news is that in those 20 years, people like me will have been continuing to refine the interventions and make them better, make them more comprehensive, which means that effectively we're going to be able to shift some of the difficult damage into the easy category.
Sure.
Which means that we will be able to rejuvenate the same people when they're 80. So they won't be biologically 60 for the third time until they're, let's say, 110 or something.
Yep.
And that means that even if we never were to actually get to the point of being able to 100% fix every kind of damage, the readout, if you like, in terms of health would be exactly as if we did have that 100% perfect intervention from the point where we could get just 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's longevity escape velocity for you. And I think we've got, at this point, at least a 50% chance of reaching longevity escape velocity within the next 12 to 15 years from now.
Okay, amazing. And to clarify that back to people, the point with the longevity escape velocity point is that in 15 to 20 years, the rate that you age sort of each year will be offset by the innovation that basically can reverse, sort of like aging. So at this point, if you make it to 15 or 20 years, we might be heretical to say that you simply don't have to die at that point by natural sort of like causes.
That's right. By the time, at the point that we reach longevity escape velocity, which some people have called the Methuselarity,
okay,
nobody will have to die from having been born a long time ago.
Which is just insane, right? But okay. And so again, and we're sat here discussing, millions of dollars being put towards this cause. I mean, how's the, there are other people that are working on this now, right? And actually, that's one of the things that I've been really lucky to see is all of these people that actually, have seen your Reddit thread or have seen some of these early talks or this coverage on 60 Minutes, etc., that you did do in the 2000s, and were maybe an engineer, and also found that part inspiring and thought, you know what, I don't want to just sit there and build another B2B SaaS app. It's like, actually, I would much rather spend my time doing things that really matter to humanity, right? It's like, this is another piece of the work that LEVF Foundation does as well, right? It's not just the research that no one else does. It's also part of this advocacy piece where you are, and I can account for this, right? We're having this conversation because of your advocacy. But I've met tens, maybe 50 people at this point, right? That like, really point to you as a reason that they are doing the work that they do now, right? So again, it's
Yeah, I guess I am very proud of the success that I've had in building this community. I think I'm just as proud of that as I am of my successes in terms of contributing to the science.
Yeah.
Because certainly it is speeding things up. But of course, it haven't nearly sped things up enough. We need a proper COVID scale war on aging. And I believe I know how to make that happen. But we shall see.
I mean, just to try and like, the point is we've got like 8.5 billion people in the world right now that at the minute are aging about a year on average every year. And so it's sort of like, whilst we're not reversing that sort of aging, it's almost like every year that we're living, we're losing 8.5 billion years of human life a year whilst we're not doing this stuff, right? Like 8.5 billion years of life. And so we may have lost in the end, and again, God knows if you can even believe the stats or what the actual numbers are. I don't know, did 0.1% of some developed nations end up dying from COVID or something on those lines? And maybe they'd also sort of like damaged us. But it's like, again, there was a full scale global war effort to stop a problem over a very short period of time. And then we reverted back to normal and simply forgot that still every single year, an 8.5 billion years of life is lost because of this preventable problem that we could actually solve if we just commit ourselves to it.
The issue is, of course, that it's not preventable yet. And people have been, hearing since the beginning of civilization, the idea that, there's this, thousands of years, the people have been saying that they know how to fix aging, and they've always been wrong. So there's a certain justification in being a bit skeptical about, someone else coming along and saying, this time we're going to get it right.
Yep, yep.
And that's why we need progress. So, the way I look at it is this, that we'll have this COVID scale war on aging when the public demand it and not before.
Yep.
Essentially, the people who write the checks are governments, and they are our elected representatives, and they have exactly one goal in life, which is to get re-elected. So, they will only do what the public, they won't do anything until there are votes in it, but once there are votes in it, they will not hesitate.
Yeah.
So far. So how do we make the public demand this? The problem is that the public have spent, as I mentioned earlier, millennia trying to find stupid ways to put aging out of their minds.
Yep.
They need some kind of impetus, some kind of permission to break out of that, what I call the pro-aging trance. And honestly, I wish the public were better at, thinking about uncertainty and generally, being rational, but short life. But what we do have is one thing that does influence the public, and that is influencers. They're called influencers for a reason. Sure. So if we were able to get the world's leading influencers to come out like with one voice and to go all in, saying, now's the time to have a COVID scale war on aging.
Yep.
Aging is the next COVID. I'm talking the real top people, the Joe Rogan and Mr. Beast and other Winfrey and stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Then I believe it would happen really fast. We would just need the right people to be demanding it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So then we have to ask, what would make the influencers go all in?
Okay.
Now, what is the incentive structure of an influencer? Fundamentally, as far as I can tell, it is they want to stay influential. And the easiest way to not stay influential is to be wrong, to be laughed at, right? So they do not want to come out and get all into something and be laughed at and not have anything to show for it. They will cease to be influenced. That's not what's going to happen. So they pay attention to subject matter experts. They actually, they try to be right. They try to get ahead of new trends and so on. And of course, I am a subject matter expert on this. But I'm only one subject matter expert.
Sure.
There may be half a dozen of us who are not only experts, but also we do a lot of interfacing with the wider world.
Sure.
I mean, literally, it's only about half a dozen.
It's insane, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's normal, actually. For most fields, there's a small number of people at the top who are in that kind of position.
Sure.
Problem is, all the other ones have the misfortune to rely on their funding for their funding on having to cover assets, basically. Either they're professors or they're in industry. I mean, typically they're academics, right?
Yep.
And so the thing is, they can't, because they can't be accused of being irresponsible.
Yep.
And when the next panel meets to evaluate their next grant application.
Yep.
So what do we need to change that? Well, it turns out that we don't need very much, because at the moment there is one huge dirty secret in aging, which is that we haven't made any progress for decades. How do we define progress here? In practical terms, what that means is being able to extend the healthy and total lifespan of an animal that we can identify with. So basically a mammal, right? Now, of course, we work with mice in the laboratory all the time. We've done so for a century. Thing is, for 50 years at least, we've been able to take middle-aged mice and make them live maybe 4 months longer than they normally would. And the way we do it is simply by not feeding them very much.
Okay.
It's a restriction, that's right. These days, we have drugs that essentially trick the body into thinking it's on calorie restriction when it isn't, so we can use those drugs instead, and they work nearly as well as calorie restriction itself does. But we know that they could never work any better than calorie restriction itself does, because essentially it's triggering genetic pathways, changes in gene expression.
Sure.
Anyway, the point is, we could do it a long time ago. Yep. So you would have hoped that by now we could have got like 8 months or 12 months.
Sure.
But we can't. We can still only get 4 months. We've made zero progress. So supposing somebody, anyone, could be me, could be somebody else, would have come along and get 12 months.
Yep.
Take mice that are already in middle age and make them live a year longer than they otherwise would have done.
Sure.
That's a trebling of the effects are.
Yep.
That would be completely seismic. Every single expert in the biology of aging would immediately know that we were in a different world.
Yep.
And that means they would be able to say so publicly and not risk being called irresponsible.
And having their budgets cut or whatever it is, right? Yeah.
So they could say so to the influencers. And the thing is, the influencers are primed. Joe Rogan's had me on his show a couple of times. He's had David Sinclair on his show a few times. Oprah Winfrey's done the same thing. The debate talks about this kind. So it's not as if we're going to have to work to get them interested. We're just going to have to go there and say things that we couldn't say before because of new data, right? And that will trigger them to say things that they couldn't say before. But and so I believe that the cascade is already in place.
Yeah.
Only thing it needs is this big dramatic advance.
Yep.
But then the question is, how do we get that advance? And of course, the answer, I believe, is by combination damage repair, the kind of experiments that they do in the LEV Foundation.
Fine. And that's it. And so you're coming to the end of this first experiment that you've run, the $3.5 million one that you've sort of already mentioned, right? And I guess you are now busy planning and fundraising for the next set of experiments. That, again, the more dollars in the bank, the more of these that you can run, the faster we can maybe get the proof that this is actually possible, and then maybe start off that chain reaction that we're saying to stop 8.5 billion years of life being lost every year, right? That's fundamentally your plan as it stands.
Yes, it is. In fact, it's better than that, because we already have the next experiment designed. We just need the money.
Okay.
This time we want to do it twice the size. We've got a few cost savings relative to last time, so it's not going to cost twice as much.
Yep.
Rather than 7 million, it's going to cost maybe 5 or 6 million. But still, it's proper money, and I don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that we should face the camera and say, look, if you want to make a huge difference, one of the most important problems that affects every single human in the world, then the LEV Foundation is an extremely good cause. And will make probably more difference than any other organization in that sort of space.
So it's the base I have in raising this money. Yeah, it's quite easy to explain. In order to get people to write your check, you have to align with their incentive structure.
Sure.
And this kind of work is not going to generate significant new intellectual property.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we're going to be necessarily able to go to an investor and say, listen, write us a check and we'll write you a check back at the fullness of time. That is the way that we used to work at Dense Research Foundation, my previous organization. Our business model was essentially, even though we were a non-profit, we would take projects far enough so they were, within striking distance of being commercializable.
Yeah.
And then we would spin them out as startup companies. They would get investment and they would move faster because it's tend to write bigger checks than donors do. But we can't do that with this work. Similarly with academia, academia is all driven around getting publications in the top journals, which is all about getting, positive results that test hypotheses.
Yeah.
And, it's all driven by the basic science rather than by the technology, really. And so, again, it's not something that really fits with the funding structures in academia. Accordingly, it really falls entirely to me because we are the only organization in the world that is getting significant money from philanthropy for this work.
Sure.
Now, our money from philanthropy comes from many different donors, but of course, most of them are giving us a small amount. It's not a very long tail, unfortunately. So the large majority of our money has always come from a small number of large donors.
Yep.
So you have to ask, how do those large donors make their decisions? Well, of course, the good news is that a lot of people, especially a lot of tech bros, have decided over the years that aging is something they want to help with.
Yep.
My very first donor was Peter Thiel, who, of course, was co-founder of PayPal. Jeff Bezos has now put $3 billion into this field. It took him 15 years from the time that I got him interested in the field, but, better late than never. But here's the problem. Most of these people, they decide they want to go into aging. And even if they decide it because of hearing from me, they will still decide how to spend their money just because of their own gut feeling. They won't actually take my advice.
Sure.
Which is about as fucked up as you can possibly get. I mean, Calico is probably the worst example. Sergey Brin and Larry Page met me in the early 2000s. So they were interested in all of this. They got involved. First of all, they decided they don't want to donate to a non-profit because they just, don't believe in non-profit doing anything perfectly useful, which of course stupid as well. But the point is, I don't mind that. I could shut off a for-profit that only a for-profit in name only. Should be what they did. It was called Calico. But then, I mean, it's just done absolutely nothing for 10 years.
And then how much money has it spent?
At least a couple of billion. And that's because they just didn't hire the right people. They had a really great CEO who knew how to do the back end, turning proven concepts into products.
Sure.
But then, to actually generate those concepts and prove them,
Yep.
they had a chief science officer who is on record as saying he doesn't have a translational bone in his body. I mean, it's just such a tragedy. It's still happening. Billionaires are coming out of the woodwork all the time, putting money into this field, and they're just having no effect whatsoever because they're just making up how to put that money into the field by talking to some kid they went to high school with or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Blows my mind.
It's challenging. Actually, there's an organization, I won't name it, but I've worked with closely at times where they do a lot of research into the nonprofit sector to try and help these billionaires make better decisions about where they get their money. And it's just the most interesting part of that is there's a load of public research they have on all sorts of problems. And there's a lot of it on the medical healthcare sort of side of stuff as well. But it's all about solving malaria or whatever it is, and none of it is not a single piece on this huge problem.
Right. So this is very much the problem of what's called the effective altruism community. The effective altruism community is actually very polarized in this regard. So, of course, what they're all about is being utilitarian, maximizing the actual benefit that is caused by giving a certain amount of dollars.
Yep.
And so there's one side of the EA community which says, well, obviously aging is by far the biggest problem in the world. Even if we had a relatively low probability of this or that funding of this or that research actually making an impact, the impact will be so astronomical that it's definitely worth to spend the money. But then there's another side of the EA community that says, well, that's all very well, but the point is we don't know how low the probability is. all we have is the experts who are inherently biased.
Sure.
Right? And so we can't trust them.
Sure.
And so the probability could be 1%, and that would be fine. Or it could be 0.1%, and that would probably still be fine. But it could be 0.001%, and that wouldn't be fine at all. Therefore, let's stick with mosquito nets. And unfortunately, that faction within the EA community has dominated over the years.
Yeah. And again, the Against Malaria Foundation, I've met some of their team, they do great work. So it's not that we're against malaria nets, it's just that there are some other amazing causes, right? And it's like, oh my God, right? The point is there's so little money allocated to this problem versus some of the other issues and just the general money that we spend on solving problems we've already caused when we could be preventing the aging in the first place, which basically causes all the other problems in the first place, right? So I love it. I think we should keep going with the general controversy of calling out the Google founders, the EA movement. I love this. This is great. Let's go maybe back to the middle of your story that we've got through, right? So again, because again you mentioned that again you gave your money from the fact to the first foundation to Sense, not to Olivia.
Actually, not to the first foundation. So I've had 3 foundations.
Okay, well here we go. Right, yeah.
And so the first one was called the Methuselah Foundation.
Okay.
So when I started getting vocal about this new idea of damage repair in the very early 2001, 2002, I was basically doing this mostly online. There was obviously a small but reasonably enthusiastic longevity community. And one guy that I met through that community was Dave Goebel. He was a very innovative businessman. He'd been in like VR early on, things like that. And he was actually working for the Department of Homeland Security at that time. Anyway, he recognized that he some of the skills that I didn't have could complement mine. He had the biggest skills. He didn't know much of the science, but fine. But he really reckoned this was worth putting his effort into. So he and so with his help, we created this foundation. Here's the foundation. And at first, we had no money at all. All we did was PR, basically. We created the Methuselah Mass Prizes, which were essentially just ways to get people interested in the whole topic. Sure. But eventually, we brought enough money in that we were able to start funding research, just on a very small scale, a few PhD students.
Yep.
Some of whom have actually ended up being quite influential later on. But then, yes, in 2009, we decided that we should split the foundation in two. Because basically, we were doing 2 things. We were doing research. We were also doing PR, they were doing. And kind of the messaging was different for the 2 things. So we felt that it could be better done in 2 organizations. So the Methuselah Foundation continued and was still doing the prizes and the PR. And I went off and did and created this new thing, the Sense Research Foundation.
Yep.
And that was until, a few years ago.
Okay, amazing. And then Sense. What happened at Sense? That was the one that you put the sort of like the money into.
Right.
Yeah. And so what happened at Sense? Why are you now at LEV Foundation? Tell us that part of the story.
So yeah, Sense Research Foundation, we created it in 2009 with a small amount of money, but we were able to gradually bring in more. And as you said, I had donated a bunch.
Yep.
Just around the time that money ran out into 2016, we started getting additional money from new donors, in particular very generous German businessman named Michael Grieve, who put quite a lot of money in over the years. Also, Vitaly Buterin came in, starting about then, various other people. So, long and short of it was for most of that period, and we're talking like 2009 through about 2021, we had a budget of something in the region of $4 or $5 million per year. And we had a facility. The Methuselah Foundation never had a facility. We had our own in-house lab where a bunch of the work was being done, in addition to funding work extramurally in various universities. And honestly, I'm pretty proud of what we were able to achieve. We worked on a very diverse range of projects, all really challenging ones that hardly anyone else was working on. In fact, generally nobody else. And in half a dozen cases, we were able to get to the point of spinning things out as startup companies because they were successful enough as research projects. And then came crashing down because the guy with whom I had built the whole thing, Mike Cope, made a very bad decision. Mike was very much a corporate type, and that was what I needed. So same as I had with Dave Goebel at the Methuselah Foundation. And so he had his own vision about where the foundation might go as the whole longevity ecosystem grew.
Yep.
And it wasn't really the same as mine. He wanted to move more in a mainstream direction. Now, anyone can make a mistake. But the problem with how he went about furthering his vision of all of this, essentially the problem was that he did it behind my back. And the way he did it was by getting the board of directors on his side. We had this board. You've got to have a board of directors at a foundation, and he had appointed this board of directors, which were all actually inherited in one way or another from the Methuselah days, and they were always throughout the whole first decade that we were doing this. They were completely useless, but they were also completely harmless. They never got in our way. We just ran the thing. Everything changed in 2019 when Mike wanted to leave in order to head up one of our spin-outs that I was mentioning.
Okay.
And that was very much with my blessing. It was a very promising technology, and that's all gone fine. But of course, the question was how to identify his successor. And that was what he did behind my back. We ended up with a successor who was drawn from the board of directors, and it was completely useless. He wasn't just useless, he was a raving psychopath.
Yep.
And, that's the word that other people from that time use. It's not just my word.
Yep.
Yep. His name was Jim O'Neill.
Yep.
And, well, as and when it became apparent that he was a raving psychopath, unfortunately, both Mike and the rest of the board had made a bunch of mistakes.
Yep.
In terms of trusting him, and in particular, trusting his attempts to assassinate my character.
Mm-hmm.
And the result was a lot of money was misspent on a sham investigation into my conduct.
Mm-hmm.
And when it became apparent that the guy was a psychopath and he'd lied to the rest of the board in order to get this all to happen,
Yep.
unfortunately, a lot of the rest of the board decided that the priority was to cover up the fact that they had misspent a lot of my donors' money. And the way they did that was by joining in the character assassination.
Okay.
So it got even worse, and eventually they found some way to fire me. And there were various lawsuits involved, but it's all coming right now, maybe. Except it's not all coming right because a lot of money, most of the money that I brought in during the end of that period in 2021, we did a lot, like $30 million, and has now been squandered.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of people have a lot to answer for. Mike Cope will have this on his conscience until the day he dies. No question about that.
Or doesn't if we do our work well. But yes, there's more punishment for a longer period of time.
But obviously the people who are at the top of my league table of hatred are the people who stayed on and continued to run the organization to the ground rather than find some way to admit their mistakes.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So I guess this is we talked earlier in the discussion about how your entry into the industry was seen a little bit heretical, and sort of your approaches and your beliefs, and then I guess that some of these people have taken advantage of that and sort of yeah. I mean, do you feel you did anything wrong or
Not at all. No. I mean, I do feel I was lucky in the sense that I had acquired a position of, no longer being a heretic and, having a great deal of community support before I came to the attention of this raving psychopath. And so, the attempts to assassinate my character were largely unsuccessful. But that doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of money's been squandered, a lot of lives have been, future lives will have been lost as a result.
Yep.
So I mean, the thing is, most of the directors were not really longevists in the first place.
Sure.
And, that applied to most of the human race.
Yep.
We've got several billion enemies in the field. People who essentially, they're in the pro-aging trance. They don't really believe in all of this.
Yep.
So really, That's why I always single out Kevin Parrott as the worst of them all, because he was very much a card-carrying linguist since 2003 or something.
Yeah.
And at any time he could have come out and exposed what was going on.
Yeah.
But he decided to side with the Berlin.
Mm-hmm. There we are. Well, thank you for talking a little bit about that as well. Most stories are not easy. You know, I want to finish on one last point before we get on. You're on stage in 30 minutes. We're hosting a whole day here again, more of advocacy work to bring more people into the space. And to finally just touch on a quick question around, we met in Vitalia a year ago, which I guess is a company very focused on creating zones in countries that allow biomedical innovation to occur. And I guess that they have looked at problems like you have and seen sort of like maybe that there are other blockers to progress being made beyond just people's belief that a problem is solvable. Maybe those are regulatory or legal kind of like issues. And I just wonder if you had a kind of a final comment on why you went to Vitalia, why you care about that sort of stuff, as well.
Yeah, so I definitely feel that the efforts that are going on around the world to improve and modernize the regulatory structures around medicine are extremely valuable. For sure, the FDA and its counterparts around the world are very much in need of modernization. They've been built to service the blockbuster drug industry, essentially. And they are just not fit for service when it comes to cell therapies and gene therapies, let alone combination therapy.
Yeah.
So, reinventing regulatory structures in new autonomous jurisdictions is definitely a very important way to go. Now, of course, there can be some modernization as well. There are some things happening at the state level in the US, and indeed, to the extent that places like Italia succeed, there will be a good deal of FOMO generating, which may accelerate things. However, honestly, the way I look at it is that, the rate at which this can be accelerated, the amount by which it could be accelerated, is probably pretty insignificant as compared to how it would be accelerated if the public started to demand it, if the public broke out of its prelating trance, which I believe can be caused by the sequence of events that I was talking about earlier. There, there is no way that I can imagine the FDA being modernized to an extent that compares with the order of magnitude acceleration we saw in the development of vaccines 5 years ago. So we need that kind of actual public demand.
No, I hear you. No, thank you. Again, it's like these things are not mutually exclusive, right? We need more funding for you to get on this, and then zones like that can also maybe aid other things whilst we have a modernization of the regime here in the US. But Aubrey, thank you very much for coming here and giving an introduction to yourself and to the LEV Foundation. Where can people go to find out more? Like, what is the best next thing for someone to do after watching this to like understand more about you, about the work that you guys are doing, and how they can contribute or help or get involved?
Well, obviously, our website, which is levf.org, Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. All of our work on the first study is reported there. And we'll continue to report more of that as time goes on.
Perfect.
Similarly, the plans for the next study are up there, as well as other work that we've done, seed funding, advocacy organizations, and lobbying organizations, and so on.
Super. Aubrey, thank you so much. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I want a full new country. So that's going in the direction of Singapore, it's going in the direction of Dubai. So first, we shouldn't forget that Singapore and Dubai and even Abu Dhabi are network states.
Sure.
And one of the reasons why I do that is because people don't realize how much geography determined history in the past. Our democracy is based on technology that's 250 years old. And then my 7th article got 45 million views.
Did you have much of a mission when you set out on writing this stuff?
I think at the beginning, when people start, they should not have a specific idea of I want to do it. Like just write. Each order of magnitude is going to have a completely different challenge. And it doesn't get easier. The counterintuitive secret they know is that the conversion rate from free to paid is much higher than people expect. As a creator, I made a big mistake, which is I found it intellectually boring.